Tiberius, the perverted emperor, the emperor that killed Jesus. You probably know him by either one of those titles, but both might just be an exaggerated headline.
It was all a lie. Guys, it was all a lie.
Yeah, it is true that Tiberius reigned from 14 CE to 37 CE and that Jesus was crucified in 33 CE, but you see that there's much more to that story. And yeah, it is true that there are reports of Tiberius enjoying shows of children and women being abused in front of him, that he trained young boys to be his personal pleasure slaves, and even stories that he did things to babies that I will never repeat here, because genuinely, I don't wish that mental scar on anyone. But there's also much more to these perverted Tiberius reports than meets the eye at first. Honestly, there's legitimate reason to believe that Tiberius was a simple man who never wanted to be emperor, a man who was trapped in the violence and backstabbing of Rome's politics that, at the time, were so bad, man, I would have made Game of Thrones blush. A man trapped in a battle for the throne of Rome that saw sons betraying their fathers and mothers starving their children to death and people being forced into suicide, or if they were lucky, just being torn from limb to limb. That era is Tiberius' legacy, the legacy of an emperor whose image is that of a 70-year-old perverted and twisted emperor who knows no morals or ethic, but behind that image is the actual story of a once good man that preferred solitude and a simple life and was forced into Roman politics by a power-hungry mother, forced into a life that twisted his already depression-stricken mind into a mind that then only found pleasure in the bloodshed, cruelty, and possibly the perversions that he was accused of. Yeah, you can tell this is going to be a dark one, so let's do this. Tiberius Julius Caesar was born on November 16th in 42 BCE and grew up during Augustus's rise to power, grew up while the rotten Roman Republic was turned into a shiny emperor under Augustus' reign as the first emperor. And Emperor Augustus was a man that was, let's call it, difficult to understand. Augustus was as much of a villain as he was the good guy, and in fact, this movie scene perfectly sums up Augustus's mindset. Just imagine that Augustus is the human in this scene.
Do your people know how many innocents you have killed? Was it hundreds?
Yes.
Lie to me again, and I'll open you from your belly to your brain and feed you your intestines.
Thousands.
And when you put them to the stake, what did you feel? Shame? Horror? Power? Answer me!
Nothing. I felt nothing. A greater crime than the act itself.
Then why spill blood, if not for the pleasure of it?
Because men do not fear swords. They fear monsters.
By turning into a monster, Augustus cleaned up the mess that was the uncivilized Roman Republic, and 90% of what you now associate with the Roman Empire, and that's the house that Augustus built and the house he ruled over for 4 decades. But there was one problem. At the end of his long reign, Augustus didn't have a son, aka no heir, but what he did have was an ambitious wife, Livia Drusilla. Livia was not just an ambitious woman, she was also a woman with no morals. Basically, think of her as the blueprint that Cersei later perfected.
I choose violence.
Yeah, I know Cersei is fictional, but I just want you to get in the right mind when picturing Livia. Livia was all too aware that now that Rome was an empire, the emperor was the most powerful man in the world. And if she believed she could get away with it, man, she would have made herself empress. But even though Rome excels in Game of Thrones levels of drama, in terms of gender equality,
I'm going to break the wheel.
yeah, that's not happening in ancient Rome. The wheel of men was too firm. The wheel of man is too firm? Man, that sounds like an exhausted gay guy. Like, exhausted. The gay guy at a birthday bash is like, the wheel of man was too firm, guys. I couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle it. I'm too childish. But you get me, though. But what Livia could do was seduce the emperor and then install her son as his successor and rule Rome through him. As I said, blueprint for Cersei. See, before she was Augustus, the emperor's wife, Livia was already married to the mother of Tiberius, his father Tiberius Claudius Nero. And if the names Claudius and Nero ring a bell, no, that's not one of the emperors, Claudius and Nero. They would come way later, but Roman men are known for all sharing about one of 20 names for absolutely no reason. So Tiberius's dad, Claudius Nero, was a supporter of Mark Antony, which made him Emperor Augustus's enemy, since Augustus defeated Antony to take over Rome and then wanted all of Antony's supporters dead. And that meant Augustus chased Claudius Nero and his family through scorched earth, not figuratively, literally. He chased Livia and her husband and the young baby Tiberius from city to city, from Rome to Naples, from Naples to Sicily, burning the forest they hid in. He really wanted them dead, but they survived. Obviously, Tiberius is the subject of this video. They survived, and long enough until Augustus's reign over Rome was unquestioned, and he was the ruler that had no more need to waste resources on people that can't harm him anyway. So Augustus granted amnesty, forgiveness, to Claudius Nero, his wife Livia, and their now 3-year-old son Tiberius. So what did Livia do? Realizing that her husband was on the losing side, she left him while being pregnant with their second son, Drusus, and married Augustus, the man who almost killed her and her family because she knew.
When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. There is no middle ground.
So now, in 38 BC, at 3 years young, Tiberius suddenly became an heir to the throne of Rome. An heir, because Augustus at this point never had any plans to actually make Tiberius his heir. Literally, his list of successors was his best friend Agrippa, his nephew Marcellus, Agrippa's son Lucius, and Agrippa's other son Gaius, and then Tiberius. But you know that 4 people waiting in line for the throne, man, that wouldn't stop Mama Cersei. Mama Livia, but you know, I want you to get into, she really had that Cersei energy, you get me? It wouldn't stop Mama Livia. And over time, all of the men in the height of Tiberius died, one after the other. And eventually, Tiberius found himself the only heir to the throne.
How about that?
Did Livia Drusilla kill them all? Well, Let's take a look at their causes of death, yeah? Agrippa died of an unknown, mysterious disease in 12 BCE. Marcellus died of fever in 23 BCE. Lucius died of an illness in 2 CE. And Gaius died of a battle wound in 4 CE. We will never know how or if Livia was involved in some, any, or all of the deaths, but gossip of the time sure liked to think so, and they liked to paint Livia as the devil that orchestrated the reign of her then even more devilish seed. But whatever the fact may be, it is true that Tiberius' mother orchestrated his ascension that he never wanted.
I don't want it.
He really didn't want it. Kind of picture it this way. You know how some parents force their children into fame and glory to be able to live their lost dreams vicariously through their children? That was Livia. Tiberius was that child actor forced into the Hollywood life against his will. He was that kid that just wanted to live a quiet life, do manual labor or join the army, but whose parent forced him into the world of fame and money. And when the kid joined that world and that fame and money hit its peak, a kid whose mind was only built for and desired solitude and a simple life, that mind unraveled and got corrupted by the twisted world it was forced into. Some actors find redemption in their life eventually, but Tiberius unfortunately never got that call from Marvel to be Iron Man.
If I wasn't an actor, I would be doing hard time.
Tiberius' mother, Livia, her ambition and her ability to actually succeed and execute her ambition was a crucial factor in what made and broke the Emperor Tiberius. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's look at Tiberius' side of the story first. Tiberius was a simple man. While his mother was scheming to get him to the throne, Tiberius actually carved out a successful life away from the inner politics of Rome. At just 20 years old in 22 BCE, he was an officer in the army, and that's not just due to him being the son of the emperor or a stepson of the emperor. No. Tiberius was actually really good at this war thing, and within the same year, he was made legatus, the head of a legion of 5,000 men. And from then on, he actually often fought alongside his younger brother Drusus, who was also one of Rome's greatest military men and commanders in his own right. And the two brothers, whether apart or together, decimated rebellions all over Rome's territories, from Spain to Armenia to Parthia to Gaul to the German frontiers. They defended the borders of Rome's empire, and the military life is suited Tiberius. He was not a social person, not much of a charmer. He only really enjoyed the company of his younger brother Drusus, and everybody else around Rome probably would have described Tiberius as a very, very awkward dude that's really uncomfortable to be around. Kind of like Joaquin Phoenix in basically every movie he's in ever.
Everybody just yells and screams at each other. Nobody's civil anymore. Nobody thinks what it's like to be the other guy.
But the thing is, Tiberius was like that because he suffered from depression. A writer of the time literally described Tiberius as tristissimus hominum, the saddest of men. But the simplicity, and I would assume the action and thrill of the military lifestyle, a life of purpose, kill or be killed, it made Tiberius feel alive, and the pure brotherhood one forms when in those kill or be killed situations is something Tiberius preferred over the impure make-believe masquerade bonds that were faked in Roman politics. So Tiberius carved out a life where he could find happiness, and eventually, outside of the military, he even found love. He found Vipsania, the woman he married in 19 BCE. And you gotta know, the thing, finding true love in Rome, ancient Rome, as a man from a powerful family, that's unheard of. That's unheard of. Powerful people's marriages were mostly arranged for more power, founded on ambition, not love. But Tiberius loved his wife Vipsania, who next to his brother was the only person Tiberius loved, trusted, and felt seen by, so it only made sense that him and his wife then named their child after Tiberius' brother. They named their son Drusus. Despite his depression, Tiberius found some form of happiness, but his mother, Livia, she did not want her son to be happy. She wanted her son to be powerful, and power and happiness, they usually don't go together. Livia pushed her husband Augustus to make Tiberius his heir, but to even consider Tiberius as a candidate for the throne, Augustus, he had to make sure that Tiberius would one day further Augustus's bloodline, and so Tiberius was forced to marry Augustus's daughter Julia and to divorce the woman he loved, to divorce Vipsania, who I mean, it's just rough, who at the time that he was forced to divorce her, was pregnant with their second child. And if you think that's messed up, let me just dig a little deeper on that by looking into the incestuous little tree of life that we've got going on here. At the top, you have Augustus, and here's Augustus' best friend, Agrippa. Agrippa was married to a woman called Attica, with whom he had Vipsania. Augustus, meanwhile, had Julia with his wife Scribonia, and when Attica died, Agrippa married Augustus' daughter Julia. Augustus eventually divorced Scribonia to marry Livia, who already had Tiberius and Drusus, right? I told you about that. And then Tiberius, as you just learned, married Vipsania. And now that Agrippa was dead in 12 BCE of that unknown mysterious illness that I mentioned earlier, now Augustus forced Tiberius to divorce Vipsania and marry his stepmom, Julia. And I mean, I'm just gonna say this, like, if my favorite orange and black hub side ever needs some new stepmom material, I'm happy to play the role of advisor for historical accuracy on this one. Lots of potential here. Another problem was that Augustus' daughter Julia, man, she belonged to the streets for real. Even while she was married to Agrippa, Julia slept around and then some. And once, while married to Agrippa, she even tried to seduce her stepson, Tiberius. Again, you know, hub, call me. I can help with the casting too. I mean, I got ideas of who can play Livia. I got ideas of who can play Julia. Needless to say, Julia and Tiberius, not a good match. Arranged marriages don't really get much worse than that. Their marriage was filled with hatred, with Julia openly sleeping around town more than ever before, doing drugs to cope with the life she hated and the husband she hated, and Tiberius, ordered by the emperor himself to never talk or see his beloved Vipsania again. And to make sure of it, Augustus then had Vipsania married to a senator. It was miserable. I mean, remember that monster I told you early on that Augustus could become to achieve his ways of the Rome he imagined? Yeah, this is a tiny glimpse of that. Now, the only person that Tiberius loved and trusted that he had left was his brother, Drusus. And then Drusus died in 9 BCE. But Tiberius was a military man, so what? His back was against the wall. Tiberius didn't break down, didn't give up, and said,
my back is up against this motherfucker. And when my back is against this motherfucker, then there's nowhere to go but that way.
So against all odds, despite all hatred, Tiberius and Julia conceived a child. And then the baby died as an infant in 6 BCE.
Okay, I'm waiting for the punchline.
There is no punchline. It's not a joke.
Well, remember the baby he had with Vipsania? Remember? She was pregnant when he had to leave her, right? And that baby died too. This wasn't just Tiberius having his back against the wall. This was rock bottom.
Nothing can hurt me anymore. My life is nothing but a comedy.
Tiberius was down and out, and it was too much for him. Honestly, Tiberius had enough. He decided to leave it all behind. So in 6 BCE, he left Rome and went into self-imposed exile. Tiberius exiled himself to Rhodes in 6 BCE, and while he was gone, the woman who once was only filled with hatred for Tiberius and lived only for lust and drugs, his wife Julia, deeply mourned their lost son and her lost husband. I'm just kidding. Julia started an affair with Mark Antony's son, and as for the drugs, Julia was on that Wolf of Wall Street diet. You get me?
On a daily basis, I consume enough drugs to sedate Manhattan, Long Island, and Queens for a month.
So finally, Papa Emperor Augustus had enough, and he exiled his daughter Julia to an island that measures less than 0.7 square miles, with no men on it and no wine. Meanwhile, in his self-imposed exile, Tiberius was obviously out of the picture as the heir to the throne, so Augustus focused his efforts on his grandsons. Remember our little incestuous family tree from earlier? Yeah, let's add to it. Those grandsons were the children of the late Agrippa and Julia, Lucius and Gaius. Technically, Tiberius' stepsons, but also his brothers-in-law through his first wife, Vipsania. Yeah, Rome is really on some Lannister thing. With Julia in exile and Agrippa dead, Lucius and Gaius were now fully under Augustus's care and wing, and they grew up to be young men that genuinely seemed like the perfect successors, which finally settled the matter of succession. Tiberius was trying to find peace in exile and had no interest in all this emperor business, and Lucius and Gaius were coming along nicely. Hey, all good. But you probably forgot about one person in this whole situation. Tiberius' mother, Livia. She wasn't going to accept her son pissing away everything she worked for. She wanted to rule. And for that, she needed her son to rule and return from a silly everybody I love died exile crap. Now, if you're Augustus, at this point, you should have connected some dots. Your first two choices for succession, who are not related to your wife Livia in any way, your best friend Agrippa and your nephew Marcellus, died after you married Livia. And now that Gaius and Lucius were being groomed for the throne, your wife desperately wants her son Tiberius to return from exile even though he has no interest in ruling. Augustus was a smart man, but I guess it could be argued.
Does anyone think I'm blind a man as smart as you, Tommy? Love?
Though it was probably less love and more the fact that the old-fashioned Augustus simply never considered a woman to be an actual threat. But whatever the case, he was blind to her schemes, and eventually Augustus caved and allowed Tiberius back in Rome under the condition that he renounces all interest in politics and does not meddle with the matter of succession that was finally settled. And Tiberius was like, oh, no more politics then? So it's just a boring life then, eh? Military campaigns and that, hanging with the brothers on the battlefields and that. Yeah, that's miserable, that is. So in 2 CE, Tiberius returned to Rome, gave up politics, took back his old position in the military, finally got back on track to living a happy-ish life, with the matter of the next emperor settled between Gaius and Lucius. And just when things were going well, Gaius died in 2 CE and Lucius died in 4 CE. And somewhere, Livia must have been like, I am inevitable. Now, I'm not saying that Livia definitely had something to do with the deaths of all the heirs to the throne of Rome. I am just saying that in 4 CE, when the last of them was dead, all of a sudden, Tiberius was the only remaining, somewhat logical heir, and the only person in all of Rome who wanted to see Tiberius on the throne was his mother, Livia. Just make of that what you will. So when Augustus' life slowly came to an end, Tiberius was called to his side to learn from him, effectively rule alongside him, and administer Rome in his stead. And by the time Augustus died in 14 CE, he had officially adopted Tiberius as a son and appointed him to be his heir, to be Rome's second emperor. Not that Augustus wanted to, it's that he had to. And Tiberius did not want the responsibility, but he could not refuse a dying man's last wish. And Livia was like,
That's right, baby. That's right, that's what I want.
finally, Tiberius' mother had gotten her wish. Rome was hers. Or so she thought. Once Tiberius was actually emperor, he handled the realm with the same care he handled his military campaigns. Cold and distant, but disciplined and efficient. As an administrator, Tiberius knew what he was doing, and so he really didn't need his mother constantly yapping in his ear, but yap she did. In fact, Livia straight up told Tiberius,
I made you!
not just Tiberius, Livia told everybody in Rome, and to me that just makes me think she really was responsible for all those murders that led to Tiberius' ascension. But yeah, I'm just gossiping right now. We'll never really know. Livia's thirst for power and how vocal she was about it seriously undermined Tiberius' authority now that he was the emperor. I mean, she even demanded that she rules on equal terms with him and that her decisions are heard and hold the same weight as his. And at some point, the Senate actually wanted to award her the title Mater Patriae, Mother of the Fatherland, just as they awarded Augustus the title Father of the Fatherland for their marriage, and the reign that ushered in the Roman Empire. But Tiberius had grown tired of his mother's yapping and power-hungry schemes, and he vetoed the honor. And so the relationship fell apart, to the point that years later, Tiberius didn't even attend his mother's funeral, nor did he ever visit her grave. Oh, and while we're on the topic of bad relationships, Tiberius also made sure that Julia, his former wife, who was sent into exile, he made sure that she doesn't get an allowance anymore, and so she kind of starved to death. As I said, Tiberius was cold and distant, but efficient. And you might say that the way he treated his mother and Julia is understandable, given what they did to him and how he felt about them. And while that might be true, his cold treatment of these two women, who were, despite everything, close to him, his treatment of them was a dark sign of things to come. At the time, though, it was just a footnote, because Rome was stable. In the first years of Tiberius' reign, things were good, and Tiberius made many good decisions for the realm. He continued in Augustus' footsteps by appointing men of merit into high positions, and he could not be bought nor be corrupted. He handled Rome's finances with great care and never had excessive spendings. He didn't like gladiator games or actors or any of that nonsense anyway. So unlike other emperors, he didn't waste money on lavish spectacles to buy the people's sympathy and support. Tiberius was old-fashioned and ruled quietly. But Rome's politics wasn't just about being a solid and stable administrator. Charm, eloquence, popularity, it mattered. And Tiberius didn't have any of it. In fact, the popular man of the hour at the time, the man that people actually wanted in charge of Rome, was Germanicus, a charming, dynamic young general who was winning battle after battle across Rome's borders, protecting the empire, and who knew how to appeal to the people. And remember our little family tree? Yeah, Germanicus fits in right here. He was Tiberius' nephew, the son of his beloved late brother Drusus, and also Tiberius' adopted son, which was about the only mainstream popular decision Tiberius ever made, adopting Germanicus, since it meant that after Tiberius, Germanicus would be in charge. And Rome loved Germanicus, and Tiberius loved Germanicus, who was the last living reminder of his brother and the last human Tiberius had any faith in and who he trusted to. Yeah, Germanicus died of poisoning in 19 CE. I swear, Tiberius could not catch a break. Germanicus was poisoned, and many then pointed their finger at Tiberius as the one responsible, claiming that Tiberius was jealous of Germanicus, scared of him usurping the throne. But Tiberius himself pointed his finger at another Roman general, whose name I will actually spare you because we've had enough names on this video. And this general that Tiberius blamed for Germanicus' death, when the emperor accuses you of murder, you committed murder. The general was quickly found guilty and forced to commit suicide. So that's why you didn't need to know the name, and that settled the matter of who Germanicus' murderer was. Whether or not Tiberius did actually kill him out of fear or jealousy is highly doubtful to me. But we'll never really know. But either way, due to sorrow or due to guilt, the death of his nephew Germanicus finally broke the emperor. Tiberius had now fully hit rock bottom. What little love Tiberius still had for people died with Germanicus. From now on, people were nothing but a tool for access to the emperor. The constant lies and betrayal of Roman politics had scarred Tiberius, and he grew so paranoid that he saw plots and schemes everywhere. So he had slaves tortured to tell on their masters for crimes that Tiberius imagined. And he held so many so-called treason trials, hunting down imaginary traitors, pretending to restore morality by cruelly and immorally killing innocents. It was a mess. Rome was a bloody, seriously bloody mess. While Julius Caesar was often not cruel enough to his enemies, and Augustus only became a monster for the sake of the greater good, Tiberius, he just morphed into an unrecognizable, bloodthirsty fiend. And even so, all the blood he spilled still didn't still his paranoia. So in 22 CE, Tiberius once again decided to leave Rome and left for his villa overlooking the cliffs of Capri, a villa of perverted legend, which had walls painted with sexual imagery and halls filled with the screams of young boys and women who were molested or worse for the emperor's entertainment and pleasure. And while Tiberius was away, falling deeper and deeper into depravity, he left Rome in charge of a man named Sejanus, an officer and a friend who mainly only shared one interest with Tiberius: cruelty. Unlike Tiberius, Sejanus didn't struggle with his cruelty. He didn't adopt the cruelty through hardship. Nah, Sejanus embraced it. He knew.
I was born in it, molded by it.
And also, unlike Tiberius, Sejanus had no problem ruling over Rome. He loved power, and the fact that Tiberius had left him in charge of Rome, he loved it. So with Tiberius gone to become the master pervert of the universe in Capri, Sejanus did everything he could to establish his position and cement it in Rome. He handed out positions of power to his friends from the military and continued the treason trials to target wealthy Roman families and anyone that might oppose Sejanus. And amongst those people were the widow of Tiberius's nephew Germanicus and two of their 3 sons, whose names I will also spare you because each child is named after someone that already appeared in the story. Remember, all the Romans have names that are all the same. And listing their names would just make this unnecessarily complicated because, the sons are about to die anyway. You see, with them being the sons of Tiberius's adopted son Germanicus, kind of a chance that Tiberius might make them his heir, so better safe than sorry. Sejanus used the treason laws to accuse the 2 older sons of treason. So he had one son starved to death, starved to the point where the guy ate his mattress before he died, and the other son they forced to commit suicide. Now you might say, how could Tiberius let this happen? Didn't he love Germanicus? Wasn't Germanicus the son of Tiberius's beloved brother? Yes. Tiberius was too busy inviting male sex slaves of young ages into his villa on Capri and forcing them to drink so much wine that they had to pee, and then he tied up their penises so that they couldn't pee.
What?
Yes, just one of the many things that gave Tiberius pleasure now in around 25 CE at over 60 years old. And if he wasn't doing that or sleeping with anyone of any gender and any age, mostly against their will, he liked to train young boys to become his little fishes, as Tiberius liked to call them, whose job it was to swim after him in his pool underwater and lick and tickle him in places that made the old man feel good.
What the fuck?
That and a lot of alcohol meant Tiberius no longer cared about what was going on in Rome. So in essence, Sejanus, in all but name, was now Rome's emperor. And maybe Sejanus could have sailed that ship into the sunshine, but he got a little too power hungry and wanted the official title of emperor along with the power and the lifestyle. And in that greedy pursuit, Sejanus made one crucial mistake. In order to make sure that Tiberius eventually appoints him as his successor, Sejanus had to get rid of Tiberius' surviving son, Drusus. Remember? The surviving child of his marriage with Vipsania from when things were still okay, the son that they named after Tiberius' late brother. Sejanus knew that Tiberius' son Drusus was the natural heir to the throne. So to solve that issue, Sejanus seduced Drusus' wife Livilia, and then together they plotted to kill Drusus, and in 23 CE they did. Tiberius' son Drusus died of poisoning. Bruh. So many things. First of all, it feels like getting married or having children in ancient Rome is more of a setup to be betrayed than anything else. And second of all, Tiberius has the most insane villain origin story ever. I mean, mother, abusive, wife, forced to divorce her. The second son he had with that wife, dead. Second wife, drug addict who hated him and also dead. Son he had with that second wife, dead. Brother, dead. Adopted son and nephew, yeah, dead. Adopted sons, 2 sons, dead and dead. And his one son who lived past the age of 30, dead. And you could say that all of this, literally all of it, only happened because his mother forced him into the life of succession, into becoming emperor. If Tiberius had remained a simple military man, arguably none of this would have ever happened. But now, here he was, almost 70 years old, tying up people's willies when they have to pee, with not a single soul left that actually cares for him or that he cares for. But the death of his son finally launched Tiberius back into action. He actually returned to Rome to launch an investigation into Drusus' death, and at this point, after what Sejanus had done to the city, treason trials for years, random people killed for crimes they never even thought of, at this point, after everything Sejanus did, the city was not happy to see Tiberius return, because everything that Sejanus did was directly associated with him. And tales of Tiberius' time in Capri ranged from perverse to gruesome. I mean, I already told you about the perverse side of things, and I'm sure you would like to forget, but on the gruesome side of things, it was said that when a fisherman visited Tiberius in Capri to pay respects to the emperor and gift him a fish, paranoid Tiberius was convinced the fisherman was an assassin, so he had his guards rub the fish against the man's face until the fish's scales, rough as sandpaper, had reduced the man's face down to flesh and bones. And even then, the fisherman jokingly whimpered, "Thank God I did not bring the emperor that huge crab I also caught." So then Tiberius sent for that crab to see what a crab can do to a fisherman's face. So yeah, Rome, not excited for Tiberius to return. But luckily for them, his motivation to avenge his son didn't last long. It didn't lead anywhere. He didn't find out who the killer was, not really. And this, to me, this aspect that I'm about to share is one of the crucial aspects of old man Tiberius. When he returned to Rome, he saw that his friend, the man he left in charge, Sejanus, had killed people all over the city and accumulated as much power as he could. And he saw that Sejanus was now with the wife of his dead son. Tiberius saw all of that. And he still didn't put together that Sejanus is probably the one responsible for the mysterious, not so mysterious, poisoning of his son. I mean, Sejanus even asked Tiberius for his blessing to marry his dead son's wife, and still Tiberius was blind to it all. Sure, he vetoed their wedding out of respect for his dead son, but he could not see what Sejanus was up to right under his nose, and Sejanus was not even trying to do a good job at hiding it. And see, that to me, that does not scream evil fish scales, face rubber, pee-pee tying pervert murderer. To me, that screams super depressed guy who just gave up on the world. And it is due to that I lean towards thinking that the perverted tales of what Tiberius got up to in Capri are exaggerated. And perverse exaggerations of emperors' private affairs were nothing strange. Gossip and slander was a powerful tool in ancient Rome, and the man who historically documented all these perverted and gruesome tales I told you about, Tiberius and Capri, we know that man, for a fact, that writer, had every reason to hate Tiberius and slander him. So think of these disgusting Tiberius rumors as something like the gossip tabloids at the comments section of the time. We will never know how much, if any, truth there is to it. Or if maybe all of it is true and Tiberius is really the most disgusting, perverted man in history. What we do know for a fact is that he was a man at his wits' end. And without avenging his son, the emperor returned to Capri in 27 CE. And this time, he would never return to Rome again. But he would send for one Roman to join him in Capri, the only remaining distant family member he cared for. Remember how I said that Sejanus had 2 of Germanicus's 3 sons killed? Yeah, I never gave you the name of the 3rd son. That 3rd son had often joined Germanicus on his war campaigns and would strut around the war camp all proud, wearing a soldier's uniform that was way too big for the young boy, and the soldiers thought that was cute, so they nicknamed Germanicus' youngest son Little Boot, a nickname that stuck forever, a nickname that in Latin translates to Caligula. Yeah, the Caligula. If you know, you know. And if you don't know, you'll learn soon. 18-year-old Caligula joined then 71-year-old Tiberius in his exile on Capri in 31 CE, and Tiberius groomed Caligula to be his heir and successor. And if you believe the rumors about the bloodfests and orgies going on Capri, well, he groomed Caligula to be more than that, and quite possibly turned him into the monster Caligula would later become. But that's a different story, because back in Rome, Sejanus was still living large and truly thought himself to be the emperor, so he ignored Tiberius' marriage veto and married the wife of Tiberius' late son, Drusus. He married Livilla. And if you thought that in this video you already heard the worst of the backstabbing and the family betrayal that this tale has to offer, I present you with one more gem. Livilla's own mother wrote Tiberius a letter to Capri, telling him that her daughter and Sejanus had defied his orders and that the two now planned to murder him and Caligula to take the throne. Yeah, the mother snitched on the daughter. But that's not the backstabbing crazy part. Tiberius then gave orders to the Senate to put Sejanus on trial for treason, and of course that wasn't much of a trial. Sejanus was immediately found guilty, as was his wife Livilla, and Livilla was then sentenced to be starved to death. And her own mother, who wrote the letter to Tiberius, was in charge of supervising her daughter to make sure she doesn't eat anything and really dies of starvation. He's sleeping. I wanted to get a reaction with him. He's sleeping. I'm just shocked. No memes, just...
Damn! I'm sorry.
As for Sejanus, in 31 CE, he was strangled to death as punishment for his crime and then thrown into the Roman mob he had been terrorizing for years, fodder for the Roman people who tore him apart limb from limb. And that is the last major tale of Tiberius' life that he was actively involved in. But in 33 CE, during his reign, another major event occurred. A man was crucified. A man you might know as Jesus. Oh yeah, big historic event, huge, unforgettable, except that at the time no one cared about it and literally everybody forgot about it the day after. But the question is, did Tiberius kill Jesus? I mean, sure, Jesus, who at the time would have rather been known as Yeshua, was killed during Tiberius' reign. Tiberius had no problem with the persecution of foreign religions like Christianity. In fact, he was all for it. Kill these guys. He loved it. And with that in mind, as the head guy, yes, him allowing it, embracing it, it gives Tiberius responsibility in Jesus' death. Yes. But in 33 CE, when Jesus was crucified, Tiberius was in Capri. Tiberius had no idea anymore what was going on in Rome, and he didn't care. And even if he did, Jesus, the man, was one of many religious leaders proclaiming to be the savior or the son of one god or another at the time. But he was not a military leader, so simply put, he was not an aggressor, so he was not someone that would ever pop up on the emperor's radar. The man who was actually in charge of dealing with leaders of religious sects was Pontius Pilate, and he ordered Jesus to be crucified. But even to Pontius Pilate, honestly, that was just another day, just another crucifixion at the time. To Pilate, and this was just his job. That's what he did. Now, sure, now there are texts that say Pilate felt something afterwards, that he saw something in Jesus and specifically reported his death to Tiberius, and then maybe even converted to Christianity, but honestly, it's very unlikely. And it's hard now to see through the fog here because there's been a lot of revisionist writing going on this topic specifically, but I'm happy to read and reply to your comments and your writings on this. I will say this though, throughout Rome's time, many men were executed and crucified, and Jesus was just one of them. And Tiberius would have never heard of him, and nobody at the time had any idea what the crucifixion of Jesus would one day come to mean. I mean, it would come to literally mean everything, but at the time, nobody knew that. Nobody thought that. And the story of Jesus, that's a video for another day. But for today, we're at the end of Tiberius's tale. The tale of an emperor whose last years were just spent by him living out his days on Capri. Maybe indulging in all kinds of perversions, maybe just a victim of gossip on top of being a victim of the world of Roman politics that broke his mind and ruined his life. Either way, Tiberius named Caligula as a successor and eventually died on March 16th, 37 CE at 77 years old in his villa on Capri. And of course, this story can't end with a normal death. Of course, rumor has it still, that it was Caligula who killed the old emperor Tiberius. But the story of Caligula, a man whose name has literally become synonymous with evil, that story will be told next time on Rome's Greatest Emperors.